And salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Folks, do I have one heck of an upload for you today. Before we jump into it, a quick couple of links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely are appreciated and they do matter. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's upload, shall we? Alright, so today's upload is quite disturbing, and I'll get into all of that momentarily, and very tragic, all in all. I received a phone call from a subscriber who I have not talked to in quite some time. Actually, they were a fixture on this channel 4 years ago. 4.5, 5 years ago, somewhere around there. And then one day, he just didn't show in the comment section anymore. I didn't want to bother him or, his family. So I kind of just left it alone. I was hoping that he was okay, which he was, thank God. Because the last time I had talked to this gentleman, he had some strange kind of activity going around his home and the area that he lived at. He was an avid mushroom hunter. So he would go out and collect mushrooms, sell them as like kind of a side hustle for extra money. And the last time I'd ever spoke to the guy, some subscribers who have been with me will immediately know who it is once I say this. The last time I spoke to this gentleman, he had said that he was going to go out mushrooming and that he, had seen a Dogman 2 or 3 days prior to, and he was going to go back out to that area because I guess they were abundant there. And I had wondered about this guy. I was like, man, I hope he is all right, this and that. And so I get a phone call, and his name pops up on my phone. And it was a random, I just stayed home yesterday on Memorial Day. I didn't do too much. And so it was like, all right, this is cool. I talked to him for a little bit, and then he said, listen, I am calling because I still listen to your channel daily, and I apologize for, not being in touch sooner, but he's going through his own mental health issues and such. So he said, I've got someone that I met about 3 years ago. They moved to my area, about 15 years ago. And I just got in kind of contact with this guy, and we struck it up. He sells mushrooms to this gentleman. He also makes like custom silver jewelry and such. So That's another hint to who he is for the subscribers that have been with the channel back in the day. So he says, listen, you got to talk to this guy. I've heard you talk about how you believe that New Mexico and Colorado, along that border right there, there is something going on. And I said, yeah. Can you fill me in? And he said, well, I met a guy, and he's older than you and I, but he lived out there for quite some time. He's self-made, wealthy man. Had a beautiful kind of ranch out in the middle of nowhere, out in Union County. He had about 60 something acres of just beautiful land. And in 1982, his whole world came crashing down on him, and he ended up going into kind of a off the grid. He wasn't really on the grid, but he just became a loner after he lost everything that was important to him. Money is not important to him. He did not lose money. He's still very wealthy. But when you lose loved ones and you know what happened to them, yet the state and federal government will get involved. And also, the case was in the shadows of another mysterious kind of death in 1982 in New Mexico. And apparently, around the time that his whole world came crashing down, a priest had been murdered just outside of Santa Fe. And that took, precedence to any other kind of death or strange death in the area, because it was, a highly respected priest. So Clarence is the gentleman's name. Wanted to share the experience with me, and he had heard me talk about how I believe that there is something very supernatural and high strangeness. There's some sort of high strangeness going on, and I believe there is a deep underground city that is controlled by the alien agenda and or the one world government. It's hard to say our government, because I don't believe that our government is as, I think what we see on TV and what we read about in the papers and such are just puppets, There are people and families that are so powerful that we as citizens wouldn't even know what to do. So, but he wanted to talk to me and share some of the things that he had happen on his property back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. All right, so after talking with the subscriber, who we'll just refer to him as Redneck. After talking with him for quite some time, I asked, well, how am I going to get in touch with Clarence? Should I text him? It's Memorial Day weekend. I don't want to disturb him if he's got things going on. And he said, listen, he doesn't have a cell phone, so you can't text him. He's got a home phone. He's got a computer. And he's like, let me fill you in on who he is. So I said, all right. And so he's originally from Texas. His family is very wealthy. Old Texas oil money. And he moved to New Mexico in the early 60s, bought this beautiful chunk of land in Union County, like 60-something acres, and lived there until 1983, about a year after everything happened to him and to the person that he loved as well. And then he just sold his property and left. He pretty much took a huge loss on the property, but what he went through and what his family member went through, I really couldn't blame him. So he does have a computer, and Redneck and him had kind of struck up a friendship because Redneck sells him edible mushrooms, not hallucinogenic mushrooms, edible mushrooms. And he does like custom jewelry, silver work and such. So that's how they had met at like some kind of trade show or craft fair or something like that. And they ended up talking one day, just kind of shooting the shit. And Redneck had brought up the fact that he had seen some weird stuff mushroom hunting. And Clarence said, "Oh yeah, well, what do you mean weird?" And he was very kind of a dick, I guess Redneck said, like, "What do you mean weird?" And so he said, well, there's things out in those woods that are not Bigfoot. There's things out there that make Bigfoot look very tame. And he could see Clarence's face kind of shift and a kind of a sadness come over his personality and persona. And he said, "Did I say something wrong?" And he said, No. And throughout the time of them knowing each other, it was a slow growth of friendship. And Redneck eventually found out exactly what went down. So when I ended the phone call with Redneck, I called Clarence. And I said, "Hi, how are you? My name's Jeff. Redneck put me in touch with you, said you might want to talk." And I said, this is who I am, what I do. And I heard that you lived in New Mexico, in a very desolate area, and you had some stuff happen. And he said, "Well, what do you know about New Mexico?" And I proceeded to, I said, "Well, I've never been there, but, I've researched it. I'd like to go there someday. I'm very fascinated with the northern part of New Mexico, southern part of Colorado. But other than that, not too much. I know that there's a lot of unexplained phenomena that happens there, and very strange kind of cover-ups by the government." Excuse me. And he said, "That's, you're pretty much spot on, bud." And the way he said, like bud, it was like how Redneck said he was kind of a dick, because it was like, ooh, like I wasn't, when I talk to people, I'm not used to kind of any kind of hostileness, I guess the best word would be. And so, I said, well, if I'm disturbing you, or this is a bad time, or you just don't want to talk, let me know. I don't want to, bother you, sir. And he kind of said, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. He kind of lacks in tact, actually, is the whole, but he is a very nice guy once I kind of broke the shell. He said that in the 60s, he had moved up to New Mexico just to kind of get away from his family. His family is well-known oil family in Texas. You wouldn't hear, if you're not from Texas, you wouldn't know his family, but if you lived in the area where his family is from, it would be boop. Last name would pop, So he's like, I wanted to get from underneath that kind of shadow and just kind of do my own thing. Being my family is very wealthy. I had a good chunk of money and still do. And, I just lived my life. I bought a ranch. I bought about 60 something acres, and I had moved out there with my girlfriend at the time, who was also from Texas. They had known each other from high school, and when he moved out to New Mexico, he was in his early mid-20s. He was about 24, 25 years old, as well as his girlfriend. So they just built this kind of beautiful little ranch. They had horses, small but very nice house. And he said that in his backyard there was a huge grove of pinyon pine and ponderosa pine, just really, really deep. And he said there's a lot of strangeness that goes on in that area. He goes, I didn't really realize it until a couple years of living there. He said I was kind of blind to it because everything was new for me and my girlfriend at the time. They ended up getting married. But, it was like we were starting our life together, so anything out of the ordinary or anything that didn't fit, really, I wasn't paying attention to. I was just paying attention to getting our house built, building this ranch, and just living our life. And eventually he started to realize just how weird things were. And I said, I asked him, I said, do you mind if I, where and how close are you or were you to the northern part of, I said, I know Union goes right up to the border, but he said, I was right in Folsome. And I was like, okay. So he's like, it's just a small little village, kind of like a ghost town. Very beautiful, if you like desolate, and that whole area is supposedly haunted. And I said, okay. I said, well, that fits to what I've been thinking about here. And he said, well, he goes, have you ever heard of the Tri-Point? And I'm like, no. And he goes, if you think there is a underground city from the lower part of Colorado into the upper part of New Mexico, do you think some would extend into Oklahoma? And I said, nah, I don't know. Maybe. I really haven't thought about that. And he said, well, there's a Tri-Point where those 3 states touch. He said, and it's right on the border of Union County. And that area is also real strange. There's a real strangeness that he said the number 3 is a powerful number, the Trinity. And the second he said that, I was like, dude, this guy knows some shit. Because having a conversation with somebody, I always take people at their word, and I listen to exactly what they say and how they say things, and just little tidbits of information they spit out to me. But when he said the Tri-Point and 3 is a powerful number, it's the Trinity. I was like, this guy's spot on. Okay. You piqued my interest, Clarence. You piqued my interest. So 1963 is when he started to realize just how strange the area that he and his now wife decided to settle in. They had moved out in 61, got married, and when in like 63 is when everything kind of just slowed down for them. Their home was built exactly how they wanted it. They had their ranch, they had their horses, they had their barns, they had their beautiful chunk of land, and they were living their life the way they wanted to. He still was in, and he still is in the family business, so he would travel to Texas periodically for board meetings and things like that. He's a guy that wears a tie that hates to wear a tie. He said, I own 2 of them, and I have to wear them once a month. Other than that, I'm jeans and a flannel shirt guy. So 63, their life slows down, and he can kind of start to, because prior to all this, his wife would comment on how, just she felt like she was being watched, walking back from checking on their horses to their house. How she would see just kind of strange, anomalous lights off in the distance, north of their home, going towards Colorado border. And he just kind of took it as, And he said, well, Taos has that humming noise. He said, in Union, up in Folsome, we have it too. He said it's not as predominant, but if you are sitting in your property, or you're just sitting in this kind of dry, arid, desert-like area, and you just sit quietly, he goes, you hear and feel it. It's almost like an inner vibration is how he explained it. And he said, when he said that about Taos, he said, I'm surprised. He goes, I've heard some of your shows. He goes, I've heard actually quite a bit of your shows. And he goes, I'm surprised that you haven't picked up on the relationship between Castilla County and Taos and that strange death that just recently happened. He said, I saw the video that you did when you pulled out your map. And he said, oh, he said, I thought you had put it together right there. He said, where'd that lady, where was she living and where was she attacked? And I said the Sangre de Cristo area of Castilla County. And he said, what mountain range is in around Taos? And I said, not really sure. And he said, well, look it up. And I did, and it's Sangre de Cristo. And I'm like, holy shit. And he said, you were literally talking about a connection that you didn't even catch on to yet. He goes, there are so many connections in that area that, you know, he said there's Archuleta Mesa in New Mexico. And I said Archuleta in Colorado. Yeah, I picked that up. But he goes, the Castilla County one is, he said, I thought you had it when you had that map out that one day. So his wife starts to point all this out, and he's just, you know, he's like, well, maybe you're not used to being this far out from other people, you know. And she would go with him on his trips back to Texas and stuff. So they were always together, always. So it wasn't the fact that she was lonely or anything, you know. It was just she was more calm than he was during the very first few years. So she was noticing all that. She would notice when it got dead quiet at night, like just dead quiet, all of the sounds would stop. And one night she had came in and she said, listen, you know, Clarence, come outside with me. And he comes out with her, and they sit on their kind of patio, their outside patio area. He's got a fire going out there. He had like an outdoor fireplace. He's got a fire going because it gets chilly out there at night. And they're sitting there, and he can hear the popping of the fire and stuff like that. And she said, do you notice anything? And he said, no. She goes, that there's no animal sounds tonight. And he stops and he listens, and he's like, huh. And he gets up and he goes around the house, kind of between his home and the corrals. And he stands there, and that's when he realizes that it is just absolutely dead silent. And she's with him. And she goes, and over there, she points towards the north, and she goes, and over there, when I'm walking from the horses to the house, she goes, that's where I've seen these weird kind of light, bluish white lights just kind of hanging in above the trees and over into the little mountain area there. There's nothing at that point, but he's like, all right, you know, well, maybe, he said, maybe it's like a helicopter or maybe a plane, or maybe that's what you're seeing. And she goes, there's no noise though. She goes, it's always dead silent like this. She goes, watch, let's go back out and back. We'll sit there for a little bit, let's listen to some music. And in about an hour, maybe two, turn the music off. And she goes, and I guarantee the normal sounds will be back. Okay. And they do. And sure enough, about an hour later, everything's back. All the kind of wildlife, the nighttime wildlife in the high desert area of New Mexico. And he's like, all right, well, you know, you're not imagining it. You're definitely not imagining this, and I now see what you're talking about. Years go by, years of just little things, they'd see something out of the ordinary. They'd find a couple of dead coyote on their property that were not killed by another predator or died of natural causes. Sometimes they'd walk up and it would be cut almost like it was dissected. The eye sockets would be completely out, like just nothing there. And on like the dissection part, he said it was like the movie, Close Encounters, and all those other movies where they were, showing the helicopters and the cauterized wounds and stuff. And he said it was like that. He said there was no blood. But it was just little things throughout the years that they would notice. And as time progressed, they were getting older. Now it's coming into the late 70s, and the only big thing that really happened from when he realized that there was some weirdness going on to when everything kind of hit the fan was one night they were pulling into their property and they thought their home was on fire because there was just this huge kind of light set behind their home. And she and he are both, oh my God, our house is on fire. What is going on? And they rush up in their vehicle only to find that their yard or property beyond their home is lit up by this just kind of bright light. And then all of a sudden it lifts off the ground, and it's not a ship. He doesn't see a ship. They don't see, any kind of craft. It's just this kind of light that lifts up off the ground, and it gets really, really bright, and it either just shot rapidly away or it just lit up so bright that it just lit itself into unexistence. It just gone. It got really bright and then it was gone. Now, they had talked about that for, a while, because it was an unexplained event. They had taken their horses out that way the next day and looked for any kind of singe marks, scorched earth, whatnot. And there was nothing. There was just no any kind of evidence that anything was there. But that always stuck with him and her. They would take their horses after all of that, coming into like 77, 78 is when it started to ramp up for them. They would take their horses out towards that tri-point. And one day they were just on a horseback ride. They were quite not right up to it. They were a distance away. And they thought they had seen a pack of coyote. So they just kind of stopped. The horses actually started to act funny. And they stopped to watch a couple of these coyote kind of running. They were running very odd. Nothing about how they ran made any sense to him. She had commented that they were real big to be coyotes. She goes, "Do you think they're wolves?" And he said, I don't think they're wolves. He goes, I don't think they're coyote either. He goes, look how they're running. He goes, they're almost running like they want to stand up. And at that, somewhere around at that point, a few of them had stood up, proceeding to run, not towards them. It was almost like the creatures were definitely aware that they were there because their horses were loud. But they were running away from them, not away from them, but they were running in a completely opposite direction that they were going. They were going to the east. These things were running to the south. And like I said, obviously the horses, they were spooked as well. So they were loud, with their neighs and such. And he says, he goes, what in the hell? He goes, do you think that they both sat there and they were like, do you think they were bear? He's like, a few of them stood up and ran. Yeah, they were hunched. He said, but they weren't using their front legs to run. He goes, and after it stood up, he said, I don't even think those were legs. He said, they look more like arms and hands than legs. And his wife was like, absolutely agree with you 100%. She goes, you've never seen a bear with a tail or that elongated of a snout. She goes, I don't know what that is. She goes, what? And they stayed kind of in that vicinity. They didn't go any further at that point. Went back home. Couple days later, she's like, hey, do you think those things are out there still? She's like, I'd like to go back out and see if we can, see if there's any tracks of those things that, maybe we can make like a plaster of Paris kind of mold of their tracks just to see how big they were. And his wife was very big into art. She did a lot of artsy stuff. That being that she was very artistic, that brought her to a community in Taos. They would travel out over to Taos, and because there's apparently a very artsy community there, and had been there for quite some time. So they ended up going out, and they get to the spot where they had been standing and kind of calculated where these things would be, and they rode out to that area. And sure enough, there was what looked like really large tracks. But the front part of the tracks did not resemble the back. The back looked like a very elongated canine print. It would almost be like if you took a canine print where that back pad would be and just stretched the paw straight, just pulled it out. That's what the back looked like. The front was very similar to a human hand, but there was tips off of the front part of it. You could see that there were claws on this thing or things. So they ended up making a couple of casts of it and got home. She went into her little art room or art area where she did a lot of her work, which was off of their barn. next to their horses. That was one of the things that he was doing in the early 60s when they bought and lived on this property on top of the house being built. He was, building. He himself was helping, but, obviously they hired people to do it. But she had this beautiful kind of art studio on their property where she could do any kind of art that she wanted to do. She could throw pottery. She could, weld. She was very, very artistic. So she goes out and makes these casts of the plaster of Paris, and she starts to kind of mold them into a realistic paw or rendition of what these things would look like if these were real, not just the indentation, but she made an actual physical kind of copy of it. He was shocked at it because the back foot, if it was canine, the back foot was as big as his feet were, maybe a little bigger, and which baffled him. And then he said, if that back foot is that big, then that thing easily had to be 6 feet and more, just by how long it was. It was about 11 inches long. And the hands, he put his hand by it. His hand was dwarfed to the impression of the hand that they had taken. So she's out doing her stuff, and she comes back in, shares everything with him. And, days go by. They don't see any more of those creatures, which we know now as Dogman, because they stopped kind of going out that way. They started to go north through the ponderosa pines and such, almost going toward the Colorado border, which would be right north of them, and on their horseback rides. It was about 1980, so 2 years before his life came to a screaming halt and everything was taken. She comes running in. She's in her art studio working on whatever, and she comes running in, panic-stricken, pale white, stumbling on all of her words, talking about a human white ghost creature. I just saw this human white ghost creature. Its eyes were these glowing yellow orbs. It ran off into the pines, and you gotta come look. We gotta, it might be a sick person. I don't know what it is, but we gotta find it. And he looks at her and he's like, what do you mean we gotta find it? He goes, to explain this to me. A white ghost person with glowing yellow eyes. And he goes, and you want to find it. And he will never forget that conversation, because of it showed how compassionate she was. Because she thought that it was a human that had been lost and just was abnormal. But it looked so human, because she was working in her studio and kind of peeked out her window, because she, out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw something walk by. And when she turned to look, there was this human-like head staring at her. And she could see that the eyes, even though it was lit up in her studio, she could still see these kind of yellowish, white-like eyes staring at her. She immediately ran towards to look, because looked at her. She saw it, and it took kind of off running. She ran to the window and looked and saw it run into the grove of pine trees out there, ponderosa pines, which are huge, I guess. He says, we're not going looking for this thing, but let me go out with you, or why don't you stay inside? I'm going to go out and look around, because that's not what you saw. Was not a person hurt or sick or what. That was, I don't know what that was, but that was not something good. He goes out and he goes around. The horses are all worked up. He checks on them. They're fine. His wife's studio door is open. He shuts it, turns the lights off, shuts it, and thinking she left it open because she ran out so quickly. As he's walking around the barn in the corralled area, he checks on the horses. They're fine. They're just really worked up. He looks into these beautiful pines behind their home, and he sees this kind of very dull colored bluish light. And it seemed to be pulsating, like it was like almost like a heart would beat. It was bright, low, bright, low, bright, low, and not very big. He's got a rifle with him, and he's standing there trying to figure out what he's looking at. As he's looking at it, he's closer to the barn studio area. But he can see the home, and he's staring at this light. It's got his sole attention, and he hears this kind of thump, this really loud, almost like someone's throwing themselves against the door to the studio, and this just god-awful scream noise, and another kind of thump. He looks at the door, and he's like, what the hell? And he hears that scream again, and he runs back to their house, opens the door, shuts the door, locks it, and he said, Did you shut your studio door? When she said, I shut the door. I didn't turn the lights off though. And he said, when I got out there, the lights were on, but the door was wide open. Horses were, having a fit out there, but they're okay. But I just saw this weird light. And as I'm looking at it, trying to figure out what this light is, this hideous scream comes from your studio, and the door just gets slammed twice. And she's now like, oh my God, that's where the horses, whatever is in there could get to our horses. And she starts to go toward the door, and he stops her. He's like, listen, you can't. Did you not just hear what I said? He said, I'll wait a couple minutes and then I'll go check it. Okay, but you need to stay in the house. I don't want anything happening to you. And hesitantly, she doesn't go out. She wanted to. She was very mad at him he goes and checks, and the door is right off its hinges. Like it blew apart. Horses are fine. Horses are still raising hell in there. But the door is just splintered. Like whatever was in there kept hitting it and hitting that door so hard that instead of the lock area or the lock side of the door, the hinge side blew, it kept hitting it, and it blew the hinges right off the door. From that on, many other weird things started happening. They actually had talked about moving back to Texas, because whatever is going on here, it's almost like it doesn't want us on our own property. We saw that very huge light. We've seen coyotes. We've seen whatever else, those huge creatures out towards the tri-point, whatever that thing was. Maybe we should move. And she's on board for a little while, and everything just, they had gone back home to Texas, and they were there for a couple days. They had hired a guy to come out and check on the horses. They specifically said, do not go at night, come in at the daytime and, check on them. If there's any issues, call us at this number. We'll contact you immediately. Just, don't put yourself in danger, pretty much. And they start to decide, maybe it is time we go, he hates the thought of leaving everything that they had worked so hard for, that they started in their 20s. Now they're in their 40s, some 20 years later. And they decide that it's time to move. Well, they come back home, and the gentleman who had been watching their horses had commented and said, listen, the horses are fine, but I saw some stuff out here during the day. He goes, I listened to exactly what you said, don't come at night. He said, but I had to come out at like 5 o'clock one day, and it was getting dark. And he said, I saw in the pines behind your house, these things, it looked like people running through the trees. He said, I thought it was people. He said, I almost went up there and said, this is private property. He said, until I saw, as they were running, they started to climb up into the trees. And he said, I watched those, trees kind of sway back and forth. He said, I can't come back. He said, I don't know what those things were. I can't help you. And he said, as for, whatever else you've told me about those coyote-like creatures that you and your wife had seen, he said, that's not natural either. He said, have you ever heard of skinwalkers? And obviously, the lore of Skinwalker, the Ye-Nada-Lushi, is a shapeshifter. So that kind of piqued Clarence's interest right there. Started to look into it. He's like, no, it's not. It's not. These were something else. These were not a human. These things were far too big. And they weren't shape-shifting. They weren't, doing anything other than being something that shouldn't exist. They weren't doing anything like shape-shifting or whatnot. During this last couple of months before his life went to shit, his wife started to complain of a headache, and they started to get real sick, violently, physically sick. There were days that neither one of them could, really do much, even get out of the house. Laying on the couch, just real sick, headaches, and they go to the doctors, and there's nothing wrong with them. The doctor can't seem to find anything wrong with them. And he notices that metallic kind of humming noise, what I had talked about earlier, in that just faint kind of, and it sounded almost like very large gears with like a kind of engine rotating them, but deep underground. And he said, maybe that's why we're getting sick. Maybe the government's doing something on our property or near our property that's making us this ill. And they go out to Texas again. The second they get in the air, both of them are fine. They're away from their home. They're away from New Mexico. They get to Texas, and it's almost like it was like a 24-hour bug. They were back to normal, happy, healthy. During this trip, they decide that they're going to stay in Texas. They both go and look at some land that already has it already has a home, it has a ranch, it has everything that they want. It's just in their home state, and they both feel comfortable there. There's not that kind of overwhelming dread that their own home has. Imagine building your forever home, but always having a bad feeling there. She stays back in Texas. She's getting everything. They're getting everything together to buy this property. He goes back to New Mexico and starts to work on selling the property. They figuring out how they're going to get everything, their horses and all of their 20 something years of life with them. And they decide, they get everything figured out. And their last month that they are going to be at their forever home in New Mexico is when everything, his whole world got turned upside down. Multiple little things were happening. Up right to the point of lights above their home, and they would see helicopters off in the distance, not directly above their home, but blacked out helicopters south of their home. You could hear them like thundering through the sky. They weren't going over their home. So the lights that they were seeing were not a helicopter with a spotlight. This was something else. And there was, multiple times in multiple helicopters. She comes back. They're there. They are excited about their move. This last month is it, they're going to get everything fixed and sorted. If they can't sell the property right away. They got a realtor to sell everything, let's just get everything back home to Texas, to this beautiful ranch they bought. She's in her studio, packing her studio up, and the horses had already been transported back to Texas. So this is like the tail end of their stay. Their life is moving. And he's inside, and he hears this just god-awful scream. And he's in the back part of their house. But he hears it. It's so loud, and he immediately knows that it's his wife. And he just dead sprint starts running through his house. Opens the door, gets off his porch. They had a beautiful porch. Goes down the stairs, and he hits right the ground. He's on the ground. He's screaming his wife's name. And he's running towards their barn and her studio. And he sees a shadow or a mass of something coming out of the door. The light of the studio is dimmed because it came, something came out of the studio. And he stops because he's like, it didn't register. Nothing registered at that point, because he knew exactly what he was looking at. He knew exactly what he saw, but it just didn't connect until seconds later. And seconds were just as long as minutes during this. He realizes what he sees is this large figure that is very dark colored. It's not these glowing, or not glowing, but glowing yellowed-eyed white kind of ghost humans, as she called them, which I think are crawlers, the way he described them. It wasn't the Dogman. This was something else. It was not hairy. He could make out in the light of the barn, the house. It was still dark. It's not bright, but you got 1980s lights. It's not like what we have in our homes nowadays. And he realizes that what he's seeing is his wife is screaming for help. And this huge figure that is 9 feet, just huge, 9 to 10 feet tall, dark colored, like not black, but it was dark. You couldn't make out hair. Something has got his wife. And it has her pulling her by her head. And she's screaming. She's kicking her feet. Her arms are flailing. And he realizes that. It registers. And he screams his wife's name. And she's screaming, help, help me. Oh my God. He starts to run towards her and this creature. And as he gets closer, he's probably 20 feet away. it stops, turns, and looks at him, and it has red eyes. They are fire-colored red eyes. It hisses at him. It kind of like a snake or a lizard hiss. Very loud hiss. He can get kind of features of it, and it is what he now knows is it was some sort of reptilian creature dragging his wife out of the studio. And as it hissed at him, he was struck by this kind of fear where it froze him. He couldn't do anything. A woman he's known for ever, since high school, and he's helpless. It hissed at him. He stopped. She's screaming, kicking, flailing, and it just ran away from him and into the trees. And he's helpless. He can't do anything. He said, I couldn't move. I couldn't move. He started crying. We had to stop talking completely for a little bit. I said, take your time, don't, if you don't want to share anymore, don't. As it got away from the area where he was at, it got her into the trees. He heard this, her final scream, which abruptly ended. And nothing else after that. He ran back into his home, got his rifle and a flashlight, and ran towards the woods. He went into the woods. He could hear something running in and out of the trees, not going up into the trees, but as he got into the kind of pine-like forest, he could hear it running around him, like it was playing a game with him. And he couldn't find his wife at this point. He couldn't see where this thing was going. It seemed like it almost got right up to him, to where he would turn around and then he'd hear it over here, So it was playing with him, like terrorizing him. He ran out of the woods back to his home and contacted law enforcement. It took law enforcement almost 2 hours to get to his house. By then he had gone back out there a couple more times. Daybreak hit, and what he and the New Mexico State Police had found was his wife's decapitated body, not the head. The head was never found. They questioned him. Obviously, he's going to be a suspect, but they started to look at, investigators and stuff came and started to look at the damage inside her studio, tracks that were made in the yard, how their soil is. It's not, it's not like, it's desert. So tracks are visible, and there were very strange kind of almost like lizard footprints, bipedal lizard footprints, kind of like a webbed with what looks to be something dragging behind it, which he later pieced together throughout the years of mentally dealing with all this. Its tail. And eventually, law enforcement said that she had been attacked by a wild animal. Almost ruled him out almost immediately. He was questioned extensively, but the amount of damage, that was done to none of it could have been done by a human. The tracks, they saw the tracks. They were stumped just as he was. Then the body, it was not like the coyote were cauterized, and almost like a clean cut. This was forcefully torn apart. Clearly a human couldn't do that. Just, and he owns this property in New Mexico. He owns property in Texas. Their home. They're now forever ever home where they planned on, living out the rest of their lives. He had to stay in New Mexico until the investigation was done and everything else. And eventually, because in 1982, close to Santa Fe region, there was a father or a priest who was murdered. That took precedence over his wife's mysterious death. And he was just left with no answers. He packed up the rest of his stuff, her stuff, brought it back to their home in Texas in 1983, and stayed in Texas for a couple of years, and then randomly decided to move to where Redneck now lives and has lived, which I'm not going to disclose where or what state, because of his privacy reasons. But now he's there, and he is in his he'll be 80 this year. And has never mentally healed from what occurred. And he'll never heal. He still thinks about, he never dated after, they never had children. And that was something that they had thought about doing when they went to Texas. They were going to adopt because she could not have children. And he said to me, whatever is going on in New Mexico, Colorado, there is definitely multitude of these creatures and different kinds all living or thriving in that area. He said, I believe that those lights that we saw were portals. I believe that one huge light that we saw was some sort of craft, even though we couldn't find any scorched earth or anything like that. He said, but everything that happened to him has happened to other people there too. So I had to hit pause because my daughter was coming down the stairs. But basically, Clarence now lives in an undisclosed state, and he's old. He's never healed from what he saw and experienced. And it was sad. It was really sad, but where he's still all mentally intact. Like, it was really interesting to talk with him. Because mentally he's still all there. But with everything that he's gone through and witnessed, I think maybe sharing it with myself and Redneck, I think has helped him. The most interesting thing out of that whole conversation, though, was, for me, was when he brought up the Castilla County attack and said, where is that mountain range? And I'm like, and then I looked at it and I'm like, oh my God, it's the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, right where, because right over the border. And then he's like, I thought you were going to make the connection. He's like, I was yelling at my computer screen saying, make the connection, kid. But, you know, it's definitely a tragic case, tragic events all throughout. And to have crawlers, which we already know there are a multitude of areas of these things living in New Mexico and Colorado. Dogman, he only saw them that one time. But that last creature, to take his wife like that is just terrible. Like, why did it target her? Why didn't it target both of them? And then, ironically enough, and strangely enough, and he said that he had heard me say this once in one of the videos. New Mexico is one of the few states where death certificates are not public information. Like New York State, a multitude of other states, they are public, public info. But New Mexico, they're not. There's a reason for that, because of the amount of all of the strange shit that goes down here. Well, not here, but there. And then to have his wife's case just covered up or shadowed by a murder investigation on a priest is tragic as well. It's tragic that a priest had gotten murdered, but both are, both really had a lot of, in my eyes, precedence in that area. I don't know. Tragic case, man. Tragic case, and a really cool old guy that I got to meet last night. So With that, I'd like to thank you all for supporting this channel. It is your support, after all, that helps the channel to continue to grow and go, and honestly what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.